Brian, thanks for joining today, taking the time to talk about Christmas, Bloody Christmas, an absolutely insane film, which is about a robotic Santa Claus wreaking havoc in a murderous rampage on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Who among us has not thought that that might happen, you know? But it's now in select theaters and on demand and digital. So if people are watching and want to catch it, they can find it in those locations. But Brian, first off, tell us how you became involved with this crazy film.
I've just been friends with Joe and Josh for a while. I met Josh years ago and ended up meeting Joe through Josh. And we've just been friends and we hang out together. And this one came up and he needed someone for it. And so he gave me a call. And it's just I don't know if actually Joe knew this, but like I like Christmas horror. I even do a Christmas party every year. Like we're about to do our 14th year of a party called Christmas Carnage, which is just showing Christmas movies, the horror-based Christmas movies. And so anyway, it just was it was great. And also we were shooting on film, and Joe and I have talked about film a lot. We both own film cameras. So yeah, it was just something kind of just came together.
That's awesome. The movie itself has really a crazy, frantic energy to it, really, from the very beginning. And we'll talk about a little bit of the lighting challenges and stuff, because that's a whole nother aspect of this film that's really cool. But did the camera kind of takes us along for the craziness too, with some of these wild shots and quick movements and stuff like that. What was the approach going into this? What was sort of the understanding that you had when you sat down to plan out how you were going to move forward?
Well, I mean, a lot of it, this movie is the same with the other ones. A lot of them are you try to sit down with the director, get into their head and figure out what it is that they want to do and how they want to do it, so you can formulate a plan just to make sure you're prepared every day when you show up to set, especially on something like this where there's a lot of moving parts. There's stunts, there's special effects and car crashes and things like that. You just kind of need to know how you're going to approach these things, so you're not sitting there scratching your head with a bunch of people standing around you, you're trying to doing the same thing. So we had already talked we talked about it a lot. And I also, just because I know Joe and I've seen his other movies, he likes handhelding, he likes things to be very frenetic and moving. And I knew this was going to be the same way. The difference being, like, we did incorporate slight variations. Like we have a really big steady cam oneer at the beginning, which is a step off where it starts on a crane, steps off the crane, follows Tori across the road into the record store, and then with her as she goes through the record store and is having conversations, which is a pretty big setup. And I think a little bit different from what Joe had done in the past. And it was cool because he brought that up. He's like, I really wanted to try this Steadicam shot. So called around and found a friend who was willing to come and help us out with it. We did a lot of that at the beginning when Tori and Robbie are walking down Main Street, was all Steadicam. But then once we kind of get into the carnage, it really reverts back more to handheld stuff, just to give it more energy and life and to make it feel a little more violent.
Yeah, and it definitely feels that way, especially when you have the weird shots, that's a wrong way of saying that, but the switch over to the first person view, or first robot view, if you will, of the actual Santa, which is kind of weird because I wasn't expecting it, but it was such a cool angle and caught me off guard. Kind of, how do you go about choosing when to utilize certain techniques, I should say? That's not overused in this, which I think is probably a really good choice, but when it does get used, it's a really impactful choice.
Yeah, honestly, that it's interesting. We haven't talked about that. That was originally going to be a lot more. A lot of the Santa Claus footage was going to be from his point of view, and Joe just really likes that. He's been working with these different rigs for mounting the camera on the actor and having the actor move with it. But once we got into it, I think I honestly can't remember. To have Joe here to get his take on it. But I remember there was a lot more POV stuff that we ended up deciding not to shoot that way. And I think a large part of that was because Abe is just so good. You want to see Abe, who plays Santa,
Sure,
being Santa Claus and being him. I mean, he's just such a powerful force, and just his look and his image and the way he carried that character. We really wanted to see more of him. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think when we were on set, that was one of the things when Joe was like, well, I think I want to do a little less POV than I initially thought I was going to do. And a lot of that had to do, I believe, with just the power, the performance Abe was giving.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, I think the POV happens early in the film, and it's not so much as later in the film, which I think was probably going along with what you're saying, the right decision there, because he was really crazily impactful as that menacing Santa. Even just every encounter he has with some of the victims, and I won't get into all of them because some of it was a little surprising. He just towers over them and has that presence that I think really makes the film sing in that sense. You mentioned this a little bit earlier in terms of setting up the beginning, and what is established early on is that we're in a film where most of it takes place in the dark, but there's these neon accent lights pretty much everywhere. Whether it's in along the main street, so to speak, or if it's in the homes. What challenges does that create for a filmmaker? And especially knowing that you shot on film, was there any adjustments that had to be made there?
Not really adjustment wise, but the thing that I was thinking about or most concerned about is the neon. The neon did a lot of work. A lot of that stuff was planned there from the beginning. Joe really likes using that stuff, and he's used it on his previous movies. He just likes this very neon soaked look. The things I was concerned about coming into this is that the neon strips provide a lot of light, but the problem that you run into, especially with the Christmas lights too, is when you have a lot of little bitty tiny sources all over the place, the image or the people might be dark and you just have these little hot spots. And I did not want that, but I also wanted to make it feel like the majority of the lighting from whatever location we were in was coming from those sources, even though they weren't really supplying the quantity of light we needed. So it was just matching colors most of the time, really leaning into greens and reds and stuff like that, or purple. Purple is another pretty big one. But we would, like on the main street when they're walking, there's all the Christmas lights. The Christmas lights did do a lot, and there's street lights out there that did a lot as well. But within the facades of these buildings on Main Street, we were hiding lights in those and in little alleyways just to give like some pools of light for them to go through that looked like it was motivated by the Christmas lights there too. I mean, I think if you really look at it, you can see where it dips in and out. Sure. But it felt natural. And it felt like it was still coming from the lights that are in the frame that you see. So that was the goal, is never to really, I mean, Joe's pretty liberal with like lighting motivation and things like that, but still trying to make it feel like the lights that we were using were inside the world was important.
And it all really set the tone as well. I think that was something that was neat from the very beginning. It wasn't starting off all happy and positive and bright lights and all of this and then getting into it, but right from the get-go, you're kind of in the dark. You're in this you're in that tone, which I think really helps a lot of it down the road, especially when later on you're saying there are a lot of, you said earlier, a lot of big effects. There's explosions, there's a wild car chase, which was really neat at one point, but there's a lot that sort of I guess you can draw from as a cinematographer and thinking about lighting and all of that when you have a giant raging fire outside of a police station and other pieces.
Yeah, and some of those, it was one of the things that we did, like we really tried to let it feel natural for the world that we're in.
Yeah.
But there's also times where when the violence ramped up, we ramped up the colors as well, and we ramped up how far they would go. Like when Santa gets to Tori's house, I mean, we were just blasting Christmas lights. Well, we were blasting our movie lights through the windows, and they were ebbing and back and forth, and they're green and they're red. And the idea is those are Christmas lights coming from the other house or from around the house. And obviously they don't have that sort of power, and they weren't like that, but it was just to increase the emotional tension of these scenes by just really leaning into pushing these lights in there. And I think that it works great because I've never felt like it bumped. Like, it doesn't feel like the theatricalness of it feels unwarranted or out of place when bodies start flying through buildings and stuff like that. And it was the same thing. The when Tori and Robbie hook up That one becomes very theatrical as well, but it was still just ramping up what we had already seen, so it feels appropriate, I guess. But it also just makes it a little more fun, and it's just kind of makes the world feel a little more hallucinatory, I guess, in some ways.
That's a good word for it. It's definitely a good word. In hearing you say that about Tori's house, I think back to when they're first kind of hiding from the Santa and he's walking past the window and the light is changing that way. That was a really cool touch. Brian, you're clearly a horror guy. You're a Christmas horror guy. You mentioned earlier, you like the Christmas horror films. This film aside, what's the ultimate Christmas horror in your eyes?
I don't know. There's so many good ones. I mean, like Silent Deadly Night is a classic. Don't Open Till Christmas is a good one.
Okay.
Even the one that gets played every year somewhere in the house it'll get played is Martians versus Santa Claus.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many good ones. Elves is a good one. Rare Exports. I mean, there's a ton. I'm blanking on some of them now,
Sure.
But
put you on the spot there.
There's tons.
Yeah, it's definitely got its own like niche genre there, which is really entertaining. You've done a lot of work in the horror field. Is that something you want to stick with? Is there a genre that you kind of want to dive into?
Yeah, I mean, I do love horror. And I've done mostly horror work. But I personally, I also really like murder mysteries, so I'd like to do something like that, like more Agatha Christie style, or westerns. I kind of went down this rabbit hole of spaghetti westerns for a while too. I mean, I like all movies. I can't really think of a genre that I wouldn't want to do, because I'd like to think that whatever that genre was, I could find something in it that I would find challenging and fun to work with. And also, but it's also about the people you're working with too. I mean, if the director or producers or people and actors or crew, whoever it makes it fun and it feels like it's challenging, then I'm pretty much on board for it.
Very nice. This is maybe a little bit of a spoiler for the movie, but I don't think that much, and people probably have seen it already, or are expecting something like this. But the newscast at the beginning sort of alludes to the fact that this is, they're seeing these malfunctions with these Santas or whatnot. Do you, knowing Joe and knowing where his mind is, do you think that there's more of this down the road in terms of the Christmas Bloody Christmas story?
I do. I mean, I don't know how much he's really talked about this, but there's supposed to be a couple. In his mind, he had plans for there being several of these, but I don't know if any, like, he talked about it. I think he wants to do that. I don't know if there's any real work that's been put into making that happen yet. I think it was really getting this one done and seeing how it did and how people feel about it. But at the beginning of it, it says that there's one at the Midland Mall and one at TW Bonkers. The Midland Mall, I think, is supposed to be the other Santa Claus that loses its shit and goes on a killing spree. But whether that comes to pass, I don't know.
Definitely has opened it up for that. I think that it would be, I don't want to say an easy jump, because making a film is never easy, but the story definitely allows for that next step, which would be really neat, because it's a really well-contained, well-told story. The acting is really solid. The lighting and all that, as we talked about, is great. The camera takes you along for the ride. And the kills are just really, really fun, which is wild. I mentioned earlier, everyone that's paying attention and listening here, that this is on demand and in select theaters and available in digital. It's also on Shudder, I should mention. So definitely check it out on Shudder, which has a lot of great other content, where some of the films you mentioned, I think, are even on there too, which is cool. Yeah. What's next for you, Brian?
I've been traveling. I was working on some other stuff. I just got back, and there's talk of some other movies in the beginning of the year, but until that, I have a plane ticket to go over where we're going. I mean, it's kind of up in the air. Sometimes these things happen so last minute. They'll talk and they go, "Oh, well, it's going to be in 2 months," and then you get a call the next day and like, "Okay, we need you to leave on Friday." So right now, I don't know. I have some music video stuff that I'm finishing up. Other than that, just trying to get the 2022 wrapped up and get ready for next year.
It's coming fast. Well, hey, Brian, I thank you so much for taking the time today to chat about this. It's a lot of fun. The movie's a great time. And I do attribute that a lot to your work because, like I said, just setting that tone, but then also going along for the ride with the camera, running after people or in the car and whatever it may be, really just kind of takes you into that the intensity, I should say, of the film. So awesome job there. And I look forward to more from you.
Great. Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Brian.